Hi, I'm David Morgan,
And I'm Bill Tillman.
and welcome to Everyday Ethics, where we discuss and explore the values and issues that impact our lives every day. As we continue our conversation on Bill's book, The Integrity Wheel, today we're going to spend some time exploring the concept of loss and all that's associated with that. Bill had a very powerful sentence as he opened that book. Bill, would you share?
Sure. Well, a rule of journalists is that they suggest don't bury the lead.
Hmm.
And with this chapter of loss, I'm following their advice. And here's the lead for that chapter as well as for this episode. Quote, losses may be the most significant shapers of who we are and who we are becoming of anything we experience in life. Some listeners, viewers will say, well, that's just another abstract theological, philosophical statement. But you can add some humanism to that idea of the shaping effect of loss.
I can. Actually, last night, Bill, I was watching the Netflix Now and Then series called Famous Last Words, where it shares an interview that only airs after the death of the person being interviewed. Last night, Eric Dane was interviewed. Eric, perhaps known to our readers, is Dr. McSteamy on Grey's Anatomy or Captain Tom Chandler on The Last Ship, was a leading man in the prime of his life, struck down by ALS. And in the interview, I found it almost amazing that someone struck down in the prime of life was able to discuss his illness, his current struggles, earlier struggles with addictions in his life, which he clearly described as losses, loss of wife during that time to divorce. And yet, as he faced death and the debilitating disease ALS, discussed it calmly, even confidently, as he faced the end of his life. And I thought, I mean, someone that you might not expect, someone that you might even feel to be bitter, had responded in this way. And it was just, it was significant that he was so impacted by this and dealt with it in such what I feel was a very responsible way.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, there is now a somewhat dated book that this could be another part of it by Judith Vorst, Viorst.
Hmm.
And some people will probably make association with Judith Vorst with particularly one of the children's books that she wrote. And it was Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, um, which is guidance for children on how you deal with the feelings of things that go awry on any given day. Um, Her more prominent book that you have to call it nonfiction, uh, psychological, even therapeutic in direction, and it's called Necessary Losses.
Hmm.
The subtitle, The Loves, Illusions, Dependencies, and Impossible Expectations That All of Us Have to Give Up in Order to Grow. Now, back to your example that you pulled up, it sounds like that person had come to terms with those matters that could qualify as necessary losses, that we could find parallels in other people's lives with those same kinds of circumstances,
Hmm.
um, which might prompt us. Uh, I think an important thing to do is to identify what do we mean by losses? Do you have any list of those maybe that would come out of your pastoral uh, care years?
Yes, probably the most prominent one is the death of a spouse, child,
Yeah,
parent. I have dealt with all of those. As you know, I pastor in a military community and actually grew up in a military community as well.
yeah,
The loss of friendship and a place that we've talked about last week
yeah,
in moving every three
yeah.
years,
Home.
4 years,
Yeah.
you
Where's
you
home?
home, yeah, you've lost that. I mean, you've lost the sense of rootedness plus the familiarity with the house you lived in
Mm,
and all of that associated with that, as well as friendships, uh, loss of jobs. Um,
yeah.
I've seen nearly all of those and spent a great deal of my time as pastor helping folks realize that while they accepted the loss was not the end.
There you go.
That the
Yeah.
loss, I mean, the passage of scripture that some people would quote is we know that, we hear the quote from Romans that all things are good. Yeah, well, not exactly. The quote
Right.
from Romans is God works all things for good,
Yeah. For those,
who are called according to his purpose,
there you go.
helping
Yeah.
people admit and acknowledge, first off, this is not a good thing. You
Yeah.
can get upset, you can grieve, you can be angry about this, but then we move beyond or use even those emotions to move us on in a way of resolution towards improving and enhancing who we are as persons, even.
Well, some of my experience in congregational life is hearing from those, for instance, who have lost someone through death,
Hmm.
and the kind of lopsided advice they get from friends in the congregation or outside, trying to mean well, I suppose, but um, it's it's usually pretty hollow advice. Um, and more recently, I've noticed, and maybe it's because of the pharmaceuticals and all of that, but more commercial attention um, and articles written about those who experience dementia. So loss of memory,
Mm.
or as one friend said to her spouse years ago, I'm realizing I'm losing my mind, which has a double bind kind of meaning. And those are more personal. I think there are scales in here, levels with regard to losses, because there are social level losses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Back when it was more chronologically appropriate, I could relate to students uh, where I was sitting in a classroom in high school when the news came over the intercom that John Kennedy had been assassinated. But from that point, and with these ensuing generations of students, it looks like each generation has something that stands out um, as a um, local, regional, even perhaps national level of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that has an impact. And there just now is beginning to be some research done on what would have to be called cultural PTSD. but after loss of some kind.
Mhm.
I mean, it might be natural disasters. Here in
Right.
Florida, the dread is over against potential hurricanes.
Mhm.
Where you live, tornadoes. If we were in California on the coast, earthquakes. But each of those leave social level kinds of damage. So identifying these is helpful and identifying what we think about it, not necessarily letting somebody else determine how we should perceive it.
Right. And you've mentioned, I mean, we've talked about some of these. It's like death of a parent. That's common to all of us,
Yeah,
obviously.
there's one of the
And in fact,
necessary
most of the
losses.
ones we've mentioned are not just mine, but I mean, they're yours as well.
Exactly.
Now, there's different levels. And I learned this early as a pastor, you know, until I had lost a parent or a sibling, you know, I could say, I know how you're feeling. And then in some sense, I wasn't wrong,
No,
but it didn't resonate totally until I could say I indeed have
right,
lost a parent.
right.
And while it's not identical, I can more empathy, more care, and we can begin to walk through this together.
And there is another reference we could make out of the Pauline epistles when whatever the context was, because we only got one side of the phone conversation, with Paul to the Corinthians, advising them to comfort one another by means of the comfort that they had received. There were a lot of outside the guidelines activity in Corinth, and there had to have been a lot of hurt, sense of loss of relationships, loss of face. And some of these would have to call rather shameful kinds of things that went on. But there's some advice. How do you, and just what you said, when you really have empathy
Mhm.
out of your own experience, that's some of the beginning. And we were talking the other day about some of these ideas that you brought up, I think appropriately. So the idea of being aware of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. There are
Mhm.
interesting parallels in here of those stages with whatever the loss might be, how we're dealing with it. So,
Well, one of the things, we're talking about comforting,
mhm.
and I don't know how well this fits, but I may not have been the Big Bang Theory fan ever, but I enjoyed the show.
Okay, yep,
And I remember as the show went on, more than once there were losses by some of the characters on the show.
right.
And they would go to talk, and the only person home was Sheldon with all of his eccentricities and idiosyncrasies. This is Sheldon. And Sheldon would look at them, and he had nothing to say, but he would say, "Come in. I'm going to fix you a hot beverage
Right. Yeah,
because that's what we do. That's the social convention, and I'll be with you."
there it is.
And I think, you and I have talked about in this, and I learned this as a pastor. You go in, and when these people are losing, you don't know what to say. You give
Right.
them a hug and you sit down and you sit there. They begin to talk and share.
You listen.
They begin to sort
Yeah.
things out and make these steps on their own and move forward in that. Uh, One of the things we've not yet talked about, and I actually was reminded of this morning, uh, listening to the RNS uh, news about Anne Graham Lotz,
Hmm.
whose dad, Billy, said she was the best preacher in the family. And then her daughter, Rachel Ruth Lots Wright, both she and her mother had serious illnesses.
Oh,
They survived those, they came out of those, but as they were reflecting on their losses and how relatable they were to the losses, they wrote a book, co-wrote a book on Joseph.
ah,
And in your chapter, I think you give us a
yeah.
description of some of the losses that Joseph experienced and how they shaped his life.
Yeah. In fact, back to the book chapter, I made the point, tried to make the point that, I mean, we have the materials and there is as much in Genesis on Joseph as any other, or really more
Mhm.
than any other character. So we need to take all those narratives more seriously, perhaps. But you could write his biography around his losses. And these were pretty harsh things. I mean, his brothers basically sold him off and lied to their father of what happened to him. He ended up in Egypt and got accused of, hitting on the wife of one of the leader types, thrown into prison.
Mm.
And these kind of things just kept going on. But whatever was building in there on his sense of character, he moved through those. And even personified, I think one of my favorite phrases out of the Old Testament is, and it came to pass. But he lived through all of these kinds of detractions and ended up being second in command of Egypt. Um, his brothers came back to get food because there was you know, uh, basically drought. Everything else had gone badly in their homeland. Um, Figured out that they're brothers, and they thought, well, maybe he's going to kill us for what we did.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe in his early days he would have done that. But by that point, he said, oh no, I forgive you for that. There's a certain resonance in there with what you opened with, David, the example of about famous last words. That for some people, toward the end, there comes in a calmness that lots of us really can't identify with yet, and seems to be the effects up on people, how the losses actually have some positive consequences, which is irony, paradox.
Mhm. Well, in Joseph's case, I mean, as he reflected, thought about what had happened to him, he was able to take his loss and say, "Yes, it was tough for me."
Yeah,
But as I look back on it and reflect on all of this, I realize it really benefited all of us because I'm in this position and I can save your life.
there you go.
I mean, it's the notion that a loss is not the end, but we need to
Yeah,
take that time to think about the loss, to reflect on that loss, and
yeah,
grieve that loss.
yeah.
And then once we've handled that properly, I think we can move on from that beyond that in resolution and moving forward.
Well, and this sensitivity to loss, um, now I'm thinking about our episodes um, informing forming influences.
Mhm.
Um, Perhaps another exercise by which we can put our heads around the ideas of loss a little better is how we don't deny, ignore the influence of losses, because that's happening whether we recognize, identify them or not. That's just how we're made. Um, but here we are well around on the integrity wheel.
Mhm.
Losses getting very close to the end of the spokes, so to speak.
Right.
Uh, but here is an interesting time to say, okay, if you haven't recognized yet the interface, the recognition across the wheel of the respective spokes, here's one that can clue you in on that dynamic.
Mm.
That as we were naming kinds of losses a while ago, um, those keep coming up in our memories. And we just made the transition using Joseph and the Lot's book
Hmm.
um, and about how these consequences can be positive. So we're to the memory hope spoke.
Right.
Some of the losses we experience are the heroes and heroines. Some of the losses are the places where we have been. Perhaps mobility of life has moved
Hmm.
us away from our favorite places, um, and on and on. So, this isn't the conclusion yet of the
No.
book or this season, but perhaps a suggestion now for viewers, listeners to start thinking, okay, this is somewhat more complex than maybe we thought. There are not compartments here. There is a larger context at work, any one of which can help identify, define, and give ideas for negotiating with all the others. Now, perhaps I've run ahead too much on that.
Well,
Um,
I don't think you've run ahead too much. As you were talking about some of those other spokes on the wheel, I didn't hear you specifically mention calling,
no, but
but I
there
will
you
share with
go.
you. We talked about calling and how each Christian is called to specific tasks. I was
Yeah.
sharing with you the other day that I pastored a church once where we had a deacon who, when it came time, there was a loss of, family member passed away in our church. This man, uneducated, homespun kind of a guy, is the person I would rather be there than me because he knew how to
Mm,
help people through the loss of a loved one.
uh,
And and I'm personal testimony also, our church sanctuary this is the last Sunday we're going to worship in it.
the
This
one
next
you're at
Sunday.
now. Yeah, the one that you're at now.
The one I'm at now, there
Yeah.
we're going to rebuild a new sanctuary that fits where we are today.
Yeah.
We've worked through the grief. We're working through the grief on all of that. But
Yeah.
we have taken steps in worship services to acknowledge it, to
Ah,
celebrate it, to build on that. And I just remember some of the services when I was a pastor, when our church initiated an all saints service.
oh, yeah.
And did just a short video. First time we did it was a video of names, like the in memoriams that you see at the Academy Awards and the like. And
Right.
that was one of the most powerful services we had because people
It will be.
acknowledged the loss and
Right.
then we helped them as a congregation grieve together and move on from that.
Mm.
So,
How
well,
old is the sanctuary that uh, you are selling it, the
my
property it's
guess,
on, right?
I don't know exactly, but I'm thinking it's in the vicinity of 70 plus years old.
So a while.
It's a while, and some of their members have been there a significant portion of that time.
Yeah. So
Uh,
weddings, funerals, baptisms,
Yes.
All kinds of church-related things have happened, memories. Um, well, I know you're a pastor, and I'm not surprised. I mean, I hope all of this is getting noted somewhere that can be run through pastoral ministry, pastoral care classes and
Oh,
seminaries. Because my seminary education had none of that. How do you help people transition through uh, the loss of like a location?
right.
Um, and that's just usually not considered. Maybe you get some education about how you deal with a funeral. I mean,
Hmm.
the parts of that. But that's a pretty significant
Oh,
uh, process, and that's the word I was trying to get to.
right.
Process that you've instituted.
And he has walked with us prayerfully and
Yeah,
sensitively the entire time.
good.
I mean, he is a classic case study of how to handle something like this.
Well,
Uh, he's reminded us that we're still a congregation. We are still the same people.
yeah,
We still are following the same Jesus, Lord, etc. Will be changed,
there you go.
but there is that foundation. And one of the things that he has encouraged us to do and is that as we go through this, be aware of each other, sensitive to each other. And perhaps the best way that I can sum it up is as I do at the end of each episode, not in his words, but we're going to do our best to walk as Jesus walked.
Everyday Ethics is brought to you by the T.B. Maston Foundation, which seeks to proclaim the abiding relevance of the whole gospel of Jesus Christ and provide support for the study and application of Christian ethics. For more information or to donate, visit tbmaston.org.